On this first episode, I'm joined by Mark Kaigwa, founder and CEO of Nendo. Nendo is a digital marketing research agency that helps multinationals and others understand what's happening in the digital landscape across the continent of Africa. He has been profiled in the New York Times, is a Forbes 40 under 40, but what I'm most excited about in the conversation today is his perspective on the history of what it's like as an African, where the continent has been historically known internationally for poverty and deprivation. And then about 10 years ago, there was a shift acknowledging growth in demographics and an opportunity for economic development that in many ways has begun to be achieved, but hasn't reached full fruition. And so he's living in this tension point and helping us understand what is this like as an entrepreneur? What's it like as a leader in his community? And what are the opportunities and the challenges going forward that he sees? And so it's a remarkable conversation. Let's dive in. And today I am thrilled to welcome Mark Kaigwa, who's the founder and CEO of Nendo. Mark, it's great to have you.
So happy to be here, Matthew.
So as we get started, we've been friends for a long time. We've known each other from way back when you first joined early Sinapis cohorts. Could you just tell us about Nendo? Tell us about the business. What do you do? Who do you serve?
Yeah, so Nendo started just over a decade ago, and it really started from this desire to see African insights about Africans by Africans at a world-class level. And so I felt that one or two of those three things would be out of whack. You would have really helpful insights about the continent, about its contradictions, about what makes it sort of like similar, but you'd find in some cases that the ways that they were done, I had this impression and feeling they could be done better. And so I felt the Lord calling me to sort of initiate this and make something bigger than myself. I've been doing such amazing projects, bringing teams together all over the continent, but not under a company. And so essentially passing employment opportunities through to my network and helping build teams. And so we started. And so the word Nendo comes from, it has basically two meanings, one in Swahili and one in Japanese. So the Swahili meaning, it comes from the word mwenendo. And mwenendo is the closest word we have in Swahili to a trend. And so if you think of a market trend or anything like that, the example I like to give is if you think of a field of grass between two villages, and you come back after 3 months, the footpath, the organic footpath that people will have walked, that's the mwenendo that they've chosen. And so what we've done is we look up tens of millions of social media or public posts from across the web, and we make predictions around what's going to happen with mobile, internet, social media, and AI. And then the Japanese meaning, which was really lovely because my brother he's been based in Japan since 2010. I didn't know at the time that it had that secondary meaning until later. It's the Japanese word for wet clay. And why I love that is, clay, not just clay in the potter's hands, but really just the opportunity to shape things with clients early on. Some clients bring us broken pots to fix. Some clients will ask us, and it's the best seat in the house for us to be a thinking partner with them right before we make something. So Nendo right now, we do research and marketing and training. Those are the professional services we offer, but a real desire for foresight and future oriented thinking and trend work, and also effective marketing. And I think what makes us special is we are probably the only agency or professional services firm in our discipline that blends all three. So we have the research side, which talks really well and plays well with the marketing side, and then the training side too. And we just find ourselves able to solve some really challenging problems for our clients.
So that's amazing. So you rattled off by Africans, for Africans. I think you were also saying at a level of excellence. Can you go back to that and talk to us about how did you come to that place of conviction? Like, what's the backstory on that?
Yeah, I feel that I've had a really unconventional career. In fact, when I'm talking to young people, one of the big things I say, and I don't hide, is that I have the equivalent of an associate's degree, right? And in Kenya, it is really important to get your 4-year degree, and I don't have that. But I normally say that, with the most respect, I don't claim to be the smartest. I definitely don't, think I'm necessarily gifted in that way. But learning, I am like learning. That's something I and maybe it's a slight chip on my shoulder because of sort of not having that. But I love that, and why that's important is that for me, opened my eyes as I started to get some consultancies in the social media sphere. I happened to start traveling the continent, really seeing some similar gaps and going like, wait a second, this is puzzling to me that no one locally seems to have solved this, because I'd be working for clients based in the US or the United Kingdom and Europe, and essentially being their Africa consultant for media, for strategy, sometimes a bit for technology. And so that gave me a bit of that burden. But I realized over time that the burden couldn't be solved by me doing more. And so, as much as I would take on a bunch of projects, come close to really burning the candle on both ends, the feeling was this needs to be something that is an entity bigger than me. And that's also been a struggle, found a brand, Nendo brand. But overall, I think I've had the opportunity to be a filmmaker. I've had the opportunity to be a video game writer. Had the opportunity to be an animation writer and yeah, so screenwriter, director, copywriter, and an advertising agency, professional speaker, 40 countries now. So I had the chance to sort of like date or intensely learn and apply certain careers and meet people who would do that for a living. Author. I've written both academically and in our own publications, but then it's almost in this very intense period of learning. And what we're trying to do now, still this 10 years later, is still find a way to have this view of Africa catch on, and then also be faithful with whatever the day and the opportunity brings us in solving that challenge with a level of excellence.
So you just said a phrase that's really interesting to me, this view of Africa. What do you mean by that?
I think the African continent has gone through a series of sort of highs and lows, right? And so there was sort of this aspect of, especially in the 90s, I have an entire talk I used to give just showing how the narrative has changed. You see the front cover of Time magazine, you see the front cover of The Economist, all these really heavy phrases used to sort of write off Africa, with sort of lions, diamonds, and war, and so on. So there was that period. And then there was a period where we rebounded the complete opposite way. And this was sort of aspiring Africa, same Economist cover, like, 15 years, 20 years later. And you had this real excitement, a lot of investment and resources pouring into the continent, a lot of these very high expectations on a middle class that could absorb so much. But Africa is also a place of contradictions, right? It's still 54 different countries. It's not homogenous. It's not a country, as we say. And so you have aspects of that didn't necessarily come true. You have certain expectations that didn't happen on a particular timescale, but you still have a resilience. And on balance, I'd say the trend is actually moving positively. So for me, it's basically sitting.
That the Nendo is moving in the right direction?
That's right, exactly. So we're sitting in that contradiction in a way, and still finding the places for like you said, human flourishing, for profit, for job creation, and for value creation at the end of the day. Yeah.
So, Mark, I want to hear more about what you just shared. You were mentioning historically maybe there was a treatment of Africa. It's not 54 nations. It's one uniform reality, which is really common, I think, for the West. And perhaps a really negative picture, and then kind of a pendulum swing to the optimism and the opportunity. And what you described was a more nuanced view. And I would love to hear your perspective. You're an entrepreneur, you're a leader, you're a speaker. Can you help us understand more of that nuance? And what does that mean practically in your day-to-day, week-to-week life?
Yeah, so I think that the period where Africa was sort of, written off, it was seen in a sense of, a place where, really the only meaningful engagement you'd have is charity or, peace missions or, really aid, right? Structural development driven aid. And then you had this pendulum swing the opposite way, really boosted by these expectations on the middle class. So, for example, it was about that time that Kenya earned the title, self-imposed title, I should say, of Silicon Savannah, and that just lit, the imagination.
When did Silicon Savannah first get coined and become part of the imagination of the country?
So that would have been right around 2010, 2011 here, because there's a large sort of mega project called the Konza Technopolis or Konza Technology City, a couple hours outside of Nairobi. And the idea with that was that would become the hub for business process outsourcing, job creation in sort of tech, and ride a similar wave that India had ridden, where now because of India's development, Kenya would have a labor arbitrage opportunity there, right? You're not looking to India because they're sort of advancing. So why don't you ship a lot of those jobs, potentially call center and otherwise, to Kenya? That didn't take off exactly the same way, but the phrase Silicon Savannah was coined there. And then in 2012, in Time magazine, I'm forgetting the journalist's name, but I used to know this by heart. There was a piece, and that was the flagship piece. He basically anchored and introduced that phrase kind of at scale.
So that's when Silicon Savannah became a global.
Correct.
Okay.
And so from there, you now had, and at the time, things were peaking at the right time. So you had really solid public sector leadership in the Ministry of ICT. You had a number of really great and well-timed policies and governance and large investments around connectivity. So it positioned Kenya, by God's grace, right place, right time to really capitalize on that. And so you just had a moment that Kenya was able to ride there as not Nigeria, not Northern Africa, not South Africa, and really the gateway to the continent. And so it wasn't silicon in the, sort of traditional sense of semiconductors and so on and microprocessors, but Kenya's advantage has always been its people, its talent, its literacy, and sort of our ability to operate with a sense of excellence, at least in the service-based economy. And so from that's what I think became a pretty defining window where Silicon Savannah was even used to cover even countries that were not Kenya, because it was just, there's stuff happening in Silicon Savannah, I'm headed there.
I mean, my association up until recently was more of kind of this was Nairobi, or this was even, Kenya as a country, that there was that, everything that you just described, that human capital potential, that leadership and technology on the continent. And so, that's really important. So how do you process that? Where does that connect with the company that you lead, how you think about business? Again, that nuanced view for those, all around the world who may be listening to this. How do you think about those things? Because it's not either pendulum, right?
Right. I think we have to reconcile, and what I like about our clients and the way that they trust us with the challenges they bring us and the way that they allow us to challenge them back. That's something we're really big on. We at Nendo, we're not trying to be order takers. And we're pretty big on that. So sometimes in some rare cases, we'll say we're not for everyone, to the degree that you can expect us to push back a bit.
Can you give me an example of that? What's an example of pushback, or I'm not just an order taker?
I mean,
don't name names.
Yeah, I wouldn't name any names. I think sometimes when you're doing research and you're working in data, and that could be on people and their beliefs and behavior, or getting market intelligence. Sometimes there are clients at different points who will ask you to torture the data until it speaks what I want it to say. And I think for us, sometimes there's an aspect there of you serve at the pleasure of your client. And so you say, okay, this is my professional opinion. I'm going to send you that. However, I understand that you need a sort of, abridged opinion to sort of like make a certain point, defend a certain budget line. And you understand that like professionally, I'm obligated to say this. And so we're keeping everything above board. But, I'll send you this version too, and you can decide what you prefer to do with both. And I just say that because that's often such a tension, right? Like we think the insights are saying this, we think you'd be wise to implement them in this way. But the reality of corporate, the reality of sort of like internal competition in large bureaucratic organizations competing for time, resources, and to fit in, is that sometimes you get put in those sorts of corners. And so the guidance I give my team is, we're trying to do three things, and I sound like a broken record, which for me, I'm like, that's the biggest compliment you can give me, is we're trying to deliver great work. Great work for me is excellent. It's boundary shaping. And so we're constantly having productive conflict in service of that greatness. And you and I spoke last year about how that took us to the Rohrs in South Africa, and has us ranked as one of, the premier agencies in the categories we care about, which a lot of people told me, don't expect to come back here the next year. And I love that. I love the fact that people are saying, enjoy the moment, but it's like, it's not guaranteed to come back. And that for me just pushes me to push them. And then the second one is,
I want to double click on that. So one of the things for me that I wrestle with is what level of excellence am I pegging to?
Ooh.
How do you think about that as a leader? And we'll come back to your other two.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely times I get under my teammates' skin in terms of this balance with, yeah, what level are we playing for? Especially when you say we're playing for like a world, like meaning a standard that is greater than just Nairobi or right or so to one degree, of course, billable hours and sort of the value based pricing, all of that. We have a budget to keep and profit to make, and so that's also the tension sometimes. But the way I try to square that out is through coaching, one, and through seeking to lead by example and seeking to level my teammates up. So for a lot of people who've joined over the last couple of years, and this is I have so many sports analogies that probably bore some of my teammates to tears. But I'm always like, hey, if you're being brought in at a certain level, your job is to raise the floor and raise the ceiling, right? So I want the bare minimum of what people were able to do before you joined here to be better. It's just better with you here. That's how I'll know that things are working out, is you've raised the standard with the people there because you're observant, you're attentive, you're kind, caring, courteous, professional, and you're challenging people to rise up a bit in whatever fashion that may be. And then the best part for me is you're raising the ceiling so that what we could accomplish, your pure talent and intellectual horsepower is just helping us get somewhere. That is full credit only to you. And I say that because those are the types of things I say. And then I try to then lead that. I try to say, hey, look, let me come up under you and let's raise the floor together because this is what we're seeing. We expect to be here. Let's coach through that until we get there. And when we get there, we're still going to raise it again, but we're going to, keep, the desire for the pursuit of excellence. And for me, it's something where I say, if somebody overseas is seeing this work, they wouldn't say, give those guys a pass. Those are Kenyans, right? They don't know any better, right? Or give those guys a pass. Typos or that sort of look and feel. I don't know. Maybe they just haven't been at this level before. I do not want to hear that personally.
Why do you reference that?
I mean, I reference that because for me, in some cases, we are, in my opinion, doing things in a world where I don't have to travel to New York to have, like right now, we have a client based there, right? They could give this work to anybody, trust me, right? Yeah. We have clients out of, say, DC. In fact, a lot's happened in the last year in the development space that's seeing people no longer necessarily have the desire or conviction to send funds within the US and then here. So new entities are being set up all over the continent now, and I have the privilege of being part of a few. And with some of our clients, we're helping them navigate that. But I say that because I have seen us lose work and seen who we lost it to and gone fair play. They were just better than us, right? They were more experienced, more talented, better equipped. In some cases, I challenge guys, don't let those guys come in, again, little pep talk speech things. But I say that because I take a lot of pride, in the good type of pride, in watching us compete and saying, man, this group here is working at a level, in my opinion, that wow, even relative to their peers and just being part of our group, we have something in these core values and something in this mission and something in the training and coaching we're doing that's helping everyone play at a level that I think is a cut above. And that's, all glory to God and credit to my teammates for their effort, because I always say, no one has the word easy on their job description. Some stuff is simple, but it's not going to be easy, meaning it won't come without effort. And I'm always looking at effort more than almost anything else from teammates, where even if you're talented, I put a lot of stock in effort as far as what I'm looking for in people.
What's it feel like you've referenced several things that I think have touched this nerve of feeling like people are making judgments either on you or on your company or on your country because of legacy perceptions or stereotypes. What's that feel like?
I mean, for me, when I was a professional speaker, and again, I didn't even expect to be in that. The Lord was so kind. I was in actually a room at the very first Sinapis, downtown, EcoBank Towers, something like the 14th, 15th floor. I write this cold email to this innovation conference in Norway because a mentor of mine out of South Africa that I'd never met, that I just followed, had said, this is the best conference I've ever been to. And he had been a professional speaker. So I write them this long email. And I think nothing of it. I just sort of send it. I was like, I felt I wanted to go be at their conference. They write back and they said they'd been looking at that email for weeks.
Really?
And they were so puzzled. They never heard of, no one from Africa had ever written to them. This is a tiny town in Norway called Ålesund, but they had a massive, really influential innovation conference happening there. And so, long story short, they write me back. They asked me to tell a bit of my story. And then they invite me as a speaker. And that for me shocked me, right? Because I just did this webcam video, very grainy. I've actually found it some time back. And
Is it good?
it's all right. It's pretty grainy, but yeah, I mean, you could tell my passion. You could tell just how hungry I was just to give an alternative view of the continent and just tell my own personal story.
Yeah.
And so they made me a speaker, and I was there with New York Times bestselling authors, a lady who eventually I think became like a Nobel laureate and head of marketing for Manchester United. They fit me in between them, and I just remember being like, whoa, like what am I doing here? But what that taught me is that okay, one, and this was the crazy thing. When I landed, they had a film crew meet me at the airport. This guy's come from Kenya, right? And I remember I was like, should I take offense to this? No, I was like, I'm just gonna be a great ambassador and fly the flag. And I remember, obviously, there's like, what now some people might call microaggressions, but I really look at a number of them as an opportunity to reshape what people think, because some of them just they'd only ever seen this version of Africa, right? Especially in this smaller area. And I had what became a recurring theme for me, which was to take every microphone, every opportunity over that window to really help reframe Africa for them. And so they're like, oh, well, we're hearing how you speak and we're looking at how, you're carrying yourself. And, in some cases, not to be offensive, but, I was disarming them because I had a return ticket and I was glad to return back home. Right. And so those were things
For those who may not understand, unpack that just a little bit.
Yeah, it's just this idea of, people thinking, oh, he's made his way here, he's got the visa, he's going to disappear and try to like basically embed himself into our country and system. But I was excited to be there, to serve in the way the Lord had called me to, which was to just use my time and talents for him to tell a really compelling story about M-Pesa, our mobile money, giant that last year, for example, did over $600 billion, 4 times Kenya's GDP.
It's the best in the world, right?
That's right. Zelle, Cash App, Venmo, everyone has sort of like followed the playbook of what M-Pesa's done. Right. And so it was explaining things like that to them. And so it'd be back and forth all throughout all these countries throughout Europe and the US. Speaking with people who for me were like my, exemplars, my, just these really great leaders that I got to share stage with almost as an equal, and being shocked out of my mind that my thing was, why don't you tell the Africa story, young man? And that for me is partly why I think that looking now back at my colleagues, looking back at the pendulum that swung, I mean, some people in a way rode that Africa wave and got a bit disappointed in the mid 2010s. And so because Africa, as a whole didn't live up to that necessarily, but there's others I think who truly also like, we look at Nigeria, we look at South Africa, we look at Kenya, we look at some stuff happening in different sectors, fintech, crypto, climate tech, agri-tech. You still have some really resilient businesses that have been built on the back of venture capital. And you also have, I think we call them, or some people have called them zebra corns or camels, just our own phrase for like, it's not going to look like the big hockey stick, but it's going to be a business hopefully that's profitable or resilient to certain shocks and challenges and still be around today.
So I want to hear more about that. I'm curious. I mean, again, with Sinapis, we've been on a journey. I mean, you go back to our very first year. You're a graduate of 3 different Sinapis programs. We've been friends a long time. You're an incredible ambassador of all that we want to be about, which is really motivated out of this conviction that God is raising up remarkable leaders like you from inside their own country to launch and grow profitable ventures that create jobs, they sustain jobs, they bring innovative products and services. All of that rippling out into the community, communicating the kind of leadership that you're talking about. Where do you see this going? Because again, you're presenting this nuanced view, which I really appreciate because I believe it's true. So much of what we want to do on this podcast is have leaders like you explain these things that go so much deeper than cover stories of good magazines like The Economist. But based on the data and the work that you're doing in your company, I mean, all things digital across the continent, maybe hard to generalize, but what do you see coming in the years to come? You just, I think, alluded to some of it, but what's your perspective? Are you optimistic? Are you bullish? What are the things that you're excited about? What are you concerned about?
Sure. I think to me, and that's really kind. Thank you for that. I think I'm an optimist sort of in my wiring. I think just in my DNA. And so I see the silver lining in every cloud. And the way I see it is that Africa has a unique opportunity now in this age of AI. You look at how much I don't know, of the S&P 500 that AI is. You look at how big a buzzword topic, some people saying it's a bubble, some people saying, it's a bit, frothy, whatever. I think Africa has a unique opportunity that my teammates and I at Nendo are big on. I think it's at maybe two levels. One, I think that the continent is still a bit of a blind spot for AI, meaning that if I ask any of these AI chatbots to generate a map of the state of Delaware, they're going to do a pretty good job.
Yeah.
Ask them to generate one of the African continent, they're going to mess it all up. And I just say that as
Really?
that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just say that because even the continent, they're gonna mischaracterize certain countries, etc. And I won't lie, that's getting slightly better, but that shows a little bit of a gap there. And that gap is, it's a bit on the training side. It's a bit in how they look and appreciate the continent. What's encouraged me is, to a certain degree, because obviously people are mixed in their views of AI, but they have begun to look to India. Right? India, in some cases, has been completely overlooked, but in many of their cases, they're looking to India in a whole new way. I don't know when they'll start looking at Africa in that way, but I think that is an entrepreneurial opportunity in and of itself. And I think there's a couple entrepreneurs exploring that. The way I see it, though, is I think we have sort of a three-layered like way we can sort of like participate or take advantage, because that age is going to come and change a lot. Some of these service sector jobs that we've spoken about, some of what I'd call I guess knowledge work as we know it. And so I feel, at least when you look to Kenya, Kenya has historically been a very early adopter. That's why we're sort of the mobile money pioneer. And even in some cases, I mean, people warming up or adopting borderline sort of like dangerous, like I think ideas in the sort of like, forex, crypto, like some things end up being somewhat scammy, but it's this desire to sort of experiment and explore and stay curious. And I think for countries like Kenya, that's the thing for us to take advantage of. At the continent level, I think, I think that each country is going to have to run its own race, but you can expect that sort of Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya to still be these economic engines for their regions. The challenge of talking about the continent is you can't go without talking about governance and the government of the day and their ability to govern credibly, responsibly, uphold the rule of law. We've seen a number of changes in terms of freedom of information, freedom of expression, that mean that no matter how optimistic a view I have, there's this other angle to the story that I mean, I desire and I pray and crave for a stability as an entrepreneur and a predictability. But sometimes there's a bit of a challenge there with how especially on matters to do with debt and taxes to a lesser extent. That's the other side that it's only fair if I describe and discuss.
So freedom of expression, in your view, is moving in some cases in the wrong direction.
That's correct. Yeah, I think that there are more people expressing genuine frustrations and challenges with the ways that governments are ruling, expressing, the government talking about austerity on one side, pull yourself by the bootstraps. We've all got to be in this together, and then living in a certain way as far as, corruption and just different integrity issues that are there. And again, we're not saying these aren't, they are around the world. I think we've seen that over the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's not unique to here.
That's right. They're everywhere, right?
Yeah.
But saying that for example, right now, and I'm not an expert in this, but I think that Africa has a unique commodities opportunity that's emerging now. I think Africa has the chance to renegotiate with the world as the world sort of fractures a bit, and that's a really powerful seat at the table negotiation wise, that African governments, African leaders, and the elected presidents of many of these places would be wise, not to overlook and to really seek to put their countries up at an advantage. And so I think one of the views I've heard is even Kenyan elites need to have elites across Africa, but elites by way of this ruling class, or this class that is very economically sound and well off and insulated from some of the shocks, need to have a bit better imagination for where the country could go, because that's what would lead to either a larger vision that everyone can follow, or certain investments that prioritize jobs and manufacturing, because in some cases it's somewhat pretty extractive where the funds are going, where they're being parked, or lacks imagination in some of the investment and asset classes that people are parking their funds when they could actually be spurring. And I think there's examples from a bunch of books. Because what I'm quoting is the work of a gentleman called Professor Ken Opalo. And there's another gentleman called, I think, Efesa Ojomo. He wrote a book with Clayton Christensen, The Prosperity Paradox.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And so it looks at how even certain elites, even though corruption was present in some of those countries, I think a Southeast Asian country, would find ways to still spur manufacturing, still spur jobs, even with what somewhat ill-gotten gain. And that's the paradox of Africa, right? Is that you can, in some of those cases, the imagination is there where it still has a net positive effect than the strictly extractive one that impoverishes people and takes sort of, the gains that are there and sort of parks them in a sort of like, tax haven somewhere else in the world. Yeah, but I'm no political scientist. I just, but obviously in business, you kind of have to be to a certain extent because we're gonna, ultimately submit it under, the leadership and knowing that God is sovereign throughout. But finding that, we've got to find a way to carve our niche, globally and locally speaking.
So I want to switch gears a little bit. You, several times in this discussion, have referenced the importance of jobs. At Sinapis, that's one of the greatest desires that we have with the entrepreneurs that we work with. But I really want those who are listening to hear your perspective. Why are jobs so important?
I think to me, jobs have the opportunity to provide dignity, stability, and really create the space for what I'd call a one-to-many effect. And what I mean by that is that sometimes we look at jobs as sort of a one-to-one, and even for us, it's partly why we both have a full-time team, what we call natives, and then we have dozens and dozens of what we call nomads. So just different people at different times with us on projects or freelance or consultancy basis. And part of what we're looking at in there, the one-to-many aspect, is that when you provide a job, whether in a gig work sense or in a short-term contract sense or in a full-time, full benefits package sense, you're not just necessarily doing it for that person. That person has dependents, even if they're single and have no children, they typically will be supporting someone somewhere, somehow.
How? Give me an example of that. How's that work? I'm a single, earlier in my life, I'm a young man, I'm single, I've got a job. Like, how does that work here?
Yeah, I think here you would have potentially siblings that you're supporting, and supporting with school fees, supporting with some form or percentage of your income. You might have cousins, relatives, or parents, uncles, aunties, people in what you might call the proverbial village or back home, that are to a certain degree are being supported to some extent through you. And so you aren't just necessarily saying, okay, this is my budget and I'm just going to park this, that, and the other. You know that you could be called upon in many respects for things that you're like, but what does that have to do with me?
Can you give me a story? Like, what does that look like? Is there a story from your own experience or one that comes to mind? Because again, I think it depends. For some listening to this, they're nodding along with you saying, absolutely, this is just daily reality. But maybe for others, this is a really unfamiliar dynamic.
Yeah, sure. I think that in Kenya, obviously, you have the nuclear family, and in the West as well, mom, dad, direct, like siblings or step siblings and so on in blended families. And then I think for Kenya, a lot has to do with the broader extended family too. And so even if you are an only child, for instance, there's an aspect to which with your parents or potential cousins or other relatives that people may be relying on you, depending on you. Our social network tends to be a lot larger and more interwoven, even with what some people call loose or weaker social ties, where there's desires and expectations, particularly around material provision, that jobs then allow for people to fulfill in terms of obligations. And that could be contributing, it could be contributing even time and talent, if not your actual like finance. But finance is often a big one. Yeah. And here in Kenya, we have, for example, a concept that's sort of woven into our society and culture known as Harambee. And so it sort of started in the 60s, and sort of the first ever administration or pre. I might get some of the details wrong for any history buffs that are Googling and fact checking me, but in principle, how it works today is a sort of sense of collective responsibility and fundraising around key issues. So,
and when you say fundraising, this is not like formal philanthropy.
No. This is the equivalent of sort of, I think, if there's a Western or American like platform that sort of borrowed the idea, GoFundMe is sort of the closest thing. Like we have had that. And
So GoFundMe has got its roots here.
Oh yeah, you bet. And I say that sincerely. Like I really think that whatever you think of that model, like we could show, we could go back to pen and paper and you'd see the exact same model here.
Yeah.
That people are constantly giving, sharing, and and interacting with each other. And so if there's a funeral, a medical bill, an expense of some kind, school, university, and so in a sense, philanthropy isn't just purely for people who have, say, the disposable income and wealth, but really almost everyone has, sometimes in many cases, a set of needs outweighing the means and resources. And that's one of the reasons that jobs just may remain so important, and particularly dignified jobs, the type that people have an aspect to, that upholds, their own personal ability to influence, govern, and have, both, I guess, labor laws and some aspects of maybe we'd call it just aspects where they can thrive or flourish within those contexts, in whatever the case that may mean for them.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, I mean, it corresponds exactly with the convictions that we have. And again, for some who are, along for this journey with us on this, are saying, yeah, absolutely, this is my lived experience. And for others, I think it's just hard to imagine how all of those looser family ties are connected. And it's beautiful in a lot of ways, right? I mean, you've mentioned faith a number of times. We're followers of Christ. And so you look at the demonstration of God's heart for people and the call to love our neighbor and our family and to care for those around us. But I think that connectivity is a lot greater here, which is beautiful and also presents challenges, right?
Absolutely. I think those challenges now are the ones that then, can bring an extra burden, can bring a burden when, I'd say, for example, right now, there's some very interesting reckoning happening around millennials in Kenya and some of the expectations they had, some of the, just ways that society was trending in a certain direction, and part of the dreams and expectations having to be grieved or mourned because in some cases they will not materialize in the ways that they might have expected as far as job stability, as far as career growth. And so in some cases, some people have said it that, Kenyans are overtrained almost to this degree that, we pursue education very diligently, but the jobs, particularly the formal parts of the economy, as far as like, what you would call your white collar jobs, so to speak, part of that has not necessarily grown in a way that could absorb as many of, say, the graduates that are, leaving university every year. And so that does create some of these tensions that are also manifesting in larger migration questions with people, either through government programs that some people find contentious, are being, signing up to essentially participate as a sort of as a country's export and export of labor, where countries overseas are struggling to find, skilled, semi-skilled labor for certain jobs, and Kenya striking up some certain deals around that. That's partly not just to ship off sort of the young people to jobs overseas. I think last year in 2025, I think Kenyans abroad, it's another culture we have of sending remittances and funds back home, sent over $6 billion to the country. And so you have that as an aspect, which to some degree, skeptics and cynics will argue that the government is looking to tax those funds coming back in as opposed to creating jobs locally, which goes back to that imagination question and where do you start formal versus informal. But again, that's a political science debate. But to your question, I think that is part of what's happening now, the reckoning around what does employment and what do dignified jobs look like here in a world where sometimes the qualifications are there, but some of these local opportunities are not manifesting or translating at the same level.
Yeah, I heard this week, and I'm curious to get your perspective on this, that when we consider youth unemployment, which I believe the age range is 18 to 35, I have always heard that around 40%. I don't think there's an official government statistic. I had someone this week correct me and say, no, it's actually probably north of 60%. What's that reality like? What's your perspective on that? And I'm curious to hear this. I want to drive toward, how does this connect with some of the why behind why you do what you do?
Yeah, I think statistics in general, they tend to be, it tends to be hard to sometimes pin some of these things down. I think Kenyans are incredibly resilient people. And I say that because, for example, we have a very, in my opinion, entrepreneurial spirit or bent, sometimes different to either other East African or even other African countries by comparison. And I say that because even people who have, say, a 9 to 5 may have, in many cases, will have a 5 to 9 or several other things they've got going on at any given time, from agribusiness and agriculture to gig work to consulting or various ventures that they're genuinely trying. And even those then who don't have what we would then classify among young people as formal employment will be in some cases hustling, right? And that hustling, broad term, is not in sort of the negative, swindling type of way, but genuinely trying to innovate or create resources for themselves. And that can come through all manner of different types of gaps that they're looking to fill. And I say that because even when we hear some of these figures, I think that the that there are people probably who are earning in that way. They're trading, go here, pick this up, take it there, sell it at a profit. They're doing things that, again, are not necessarily either their calling or what they studied or what they're qualified for. But the question is, would they still be considered unemployed, right? Because it's not like they're necessarily taking any resources during that period of unemployment. So they are, in some cases, trying to find something gainful or meaningful to do. And so that's why some of those statistics are a bit hard to read or place, because this could be happening on mobile money, which is a bit more opaque than, say, the regular bank account and steady, way that we file taxes here. But I would say that it's definitely true that we have a gap of that range. I mean, I've heard some people really create some compelling arguments for why it might even be more when you consider underemployment as well. So
what's the difference between unemployment and underemployment?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to me, again, not just my opinion, I think unemployment is, again, it depends on what qualification you're using, because I believe north of 70% of Kenyan jobs will be in the informal economy. And so you're looking at the vast majority. Some people have it some ways higher than that. I was using a cautious estimate. And so some people would call unemployment the inability to secure employment within the formal salaried class, collecting, say, a steady monthly wage, and then not in the informal employment scheme. That could even be a day wage. And underemployment would be within that. It's just now I am, say, working as a gig worker, doing deliveries, but I'm qualified to do a lot more than that. I'm working as a security guard at a firm. So that's the underemployment aspect. I have the qualifications, sometimes on paper, so meaning it might not necessarily translate to a workplace. That's sometimes a bit of a bridge that a number of organizations are working really hard to fill, to help translate the classroom, into the workplace and help people make that transition smoother. But underemployment would be just times where I have the ability to participate in more meaningful economic activity, but I'm taking what's available to me at this time, and sort of working faithfully within that.
No, it's good. So switching gears a little bit, Mark, a few years ago, you and I were connecting. I don't even remember why, but you said something that changed how I lead. And what you said was, in your journey at Nendo, you no longer used words like family with your team. And I just gave away what you had switched to, that you said, you know what? Of course I want great relationships. Of course I want people to care about one another. But we're not a family. We're a team. And that stuck with me. But I want you to share that conviction, and then I'll probably interject, what that's meant within the Sinapis world as well. But how did you come to that conclusion? How has that shaped your leadership, and what's that mean for you today?
Thanks. I think in fairness, heard this on some podcast. I probably can't remember now. I think I've heard it said in and around Netflix, if I could sort of like isolate like a particular company. And to me, it really just came from this view that it's very common here, because of our social ties, because of this aspect of spending more time with your colleagues than your family, anyone else, right? 40 plus hours out of a week is going to do that to you. That the aspect of either the verbal statement of we're a family here, or the lived statement of us being a little, bristled by certain behavior, because like that's not how you treat, a member of the family. Even if you don't say it, you're just sort of taking a bit of offense to that. And so for me, part of the conviction came in a business like ours. I think it's the Silicon Valley, I think investor Vinod Khosla, who says that the team you build is the company you build. And for me, that both haunts me and inspires me in equal measure, because for us, we are a people-oriented business in professional services. And while we do have some really great IP and intellectual property and processes and some fun stuff we're doing with AI now, I keep coming back to that, because that's going to be a reflection of us collectively. And so the challenge then is, how do you still create a warmth that's there that allows for psychological safety to a certain extent, because you are pursuing excellence, you want to do it with grace, and then a competence, really preferring, really encouraging the discipline, the diligence, the detail that some people would find, I don't think I was ready for that. And I'm like, you weren't, and that's okay. And we're going to coach through that and see if this is going to work out off of that. And so that's the tension. And I find that, so the work, I think of Kim Scott with Radical Candor. I keep saying that. I found like over the last few months, I've been like, hey, care personally, challenge directly, right? And because that's what, in a team sense, we have to do. Teams will have people cut. They'll have people traded. They'll have, different like very material discussions.
But man, it's hard. I mean, for me, it's just been an area of struggle. I mean, Sinapis is a ministry, but we're working with for-profit entrepreneurs. We embrace the same commitment to excellence that you were articulated really well earlier in the discussion. And for me, I've struggled at points. And so, I mean, it really was like a galvanizing moment for me when you shared that. And I thought, I think he's right. And part of me, I hear family, and I'm happy with that. Like, people are caring about one another, and we've probably all got beautiful examples of that where it goes so far beyond, we're just cogs in a machine. But we don't do performance evaluations with our family. At least I don't.
Yeah.
We don't fire our family members when you come to that place where this isn't working. So I'm just really grateful for that insight. It was probably 6-7 years ago. And I'm curious for you, given that that's been something to wrestle with, is that still difficult in your leadership to find that line of how do I pursue excellence at truly a world-class level, but care deeply about my people and to understand the cultural dynamics that are at play?
Yeah, definitely. I think that I found that it's a struggle for me. I think in some cases, not being as judicious and exercising wisdom with the ability to say it's not working. And I think a phrase that I found quite powerful, even though we've just come from talking about jobs and sort of those challenges, is freeing someone up to the marketplace, because it could be a number of reasons why that the person isn't working out. And if there's anything I think we do, and it's probably one of my weaknesses, is probably extend a fair bit of grace, a fair bit of time, a fair bit of leeway, a fair bit of clarity. And so if anything, we will have over communicated, we'll have almost over coached. And it's not to say that there wouldn't be people who still find it, and respond in a slightly combative way, or experience, the disappointment and the disillusionment that comes with a decision that's that way, or feeling like I have very, high and perhaps even unreachable standards. But I like to tell my teammates, look, there's nothing that I'll ask you to do that I'm not willing to do myself, not willing to coach you through, not willing to sit next to you in the foxhole sort of together, to just sort of say it's not that I'm asking you to do anything that's beneath me. I want to be with you and challenge, provoke, and inspire you to do it, but also show a bit of that patience. And my big thing is always, it was actually the theme one of the years at Nendo was 1% better, one day at a time. And all I'm asking you to do is just be better than yesterday. And you could have had, again, and we're just trying to put together and stack, good days, good habits, being very process over outcome oriented. I think you can, in our business, win for the wrong reasons. Or I think entrepreneurship here sometimes is, and this is what disillusions or discourages people. It can be overly glamorized or romanticized, because there's also entrepreneurs who do that out of circumstance. They just haven't had the opportunities come, and so they sort of are there, and they might not like entrepreneurship, or they might find it pretty tedious or pretty challenging. And it does come with like high highs and low lows and some dark days, especially here. And I normally say the part that I underline is leading a business with integrity, because you do have people that are thriving. You do have people that are showing, flaunting, and exhibiting great signs of wealth, income, and seeming prosperity. But you find in some cases beneath the veneer and sort of the glossy side that there's compromises there, that there's a question whether you look in the mirror and say, is that how I expect to lead? And there's also other, what I'd call, challenges to leading a business with integrity, where you might not grow as fast, you might not grow as deep, you might have some of those actually give you an active disadvantage by sticking to some aspects of integrity. And those are the parts that, again, if it weren't for the Lord and his kindness and grace, I think that and I try to tell entrepreneurs and tell them, at face value, that I can't tell you how to run, what you're running, because in some cases you really do feel like you've got your arm twisted behind your back and you're being pinned down. Right. And moments like that are the crucible, I think, is what Ray Barrett here would like to call it, which many entrepreneurs, especially here, have to really face, in both trusting the Lord and seeking to exercise good judgment. So I pray that we know with my teammates, while it won't always, and that's the thing, I don't say staff, I don't say employees, I might say colleagues, but I'm like, these are my teammates. I just pray we can be what we call a high-performing team living out our values. We do those two things, and the values part is arguably sometimes more important than the high performance. But if we have those two things, I really feel that we get very competitive, and we've done some of our most special work when we are not walking on eggshells, not sort of like, backing off out of what could be a really great, contest in the marketplace of ideas, and really feeling like there's a confidence that comes from our preparation and from trusting each other, while also saying that, we are also at Nendo in some cases for a season. My grandfather worked one job for one employer. Yeah, so my grandfather worked for one employer his whole life, the Kenya Railways. From when he was, I think, 17, all the way until his retirement party. Wow. And I'm like, they don't make them like my grandpa. And so I tell people, and I think it's a concept I borrowed, just serve faithfully in whatever your tour is with us here. And for some people, they've stacked a really great and fun and exciting career from that. And sometimes people move on, and sometimes they stick around and things change, and sometimes it doesn't work out.
I think that's incredible advice. It's a great place for us to stop, that for entrepreneurs that are looking at, Mark, you've had incredible success. You're a learner. You're passionate about everything that you're doing. But I think that those last few nuggets about what it means to pursue excellence, care about one another well, continue to learn, I think all of that is really inspirational for the entrepreneurs that are listening to this. So thank you so much. We could talk for hours more. I don't think we're going to have time to do that today. But I think the theme for me in this discussion and in others that we've had is the need for a really informed, nuanced understanding of the opportunities and the challenges. I share your optimism. I think for Kenya and for East Africa, and again, we can zoom out to a 54-country continent, that there's so much amazing leadership like yours that we're excited to have these kind of conversations. But thank you for joining us. I feel like we could sit for hours and keep talking. This has been an incredible conversation. The purpose of this podcast is to put people like you in front of a microphone, sharing these stories, sharing these convictions, sharing the insights that you're gleaning from scaling companies. And so this has just been a ton of fun, and I'm really grateful that you joined us.
Thank you for having me, Matthew.
So thanks, everybody, for joining us for the Scale What Matters podcast.